Okay, so Sister Mary, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, Kim. I'm humbled by the spread of participants in this video conference. It's truly moving to me. Before I ask you to join me in beginning with the prayer, I just want to say my early teaching was kindergarten for 3 years, so I have some sense of what's involved there. And then I had 5 years of secondary school teaching, so I have some sense of what is involved there. And then I went to Rochester Institute of Technology for 35 years. And in some respects, that wasn't all that different from kindergarten. This morning, you probably are aware that in Bonn, Germany, the Conference of the Parties 23 is convening to work out the rule book for the Paris Climate Agreement, an extremely important international agreement. And the people on the Pacific Islands, excuse me, I've got a head cold and a cough. I'm praying to God that it doesn't interfere. However, I would love if we could pray together this prayer for Earth. All-powerful God, you are present in the whole universe and in the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe, teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognize that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey toward your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love, and peace. Amen.
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 Climate change would not have been something Catherine Macaulay worried about. It's a brand new sign of the times that we have to address. I'm aware that you may know a great deal about Catherine Macaulay, and that I will end up just repeating what you already know. But at the risk that one or other of you may be so brand new to Mercy education that you might want to know a few things, I made the outline. You don't need to be a slave to the outline. However, I'm going to try to follow it, because if I don't work off an outline, I end up rambling for an hour and a half and saying a whole lot of unimportant things and never getting to the really important. I trust I will get to some of the really important. You're probably all aware of Catherine's birth in the late 18th century. And you're probably aware that by the time she was 49 years old, she had lived a life, had inherited a good bit of money, and had decided to devote that money to the building of a house of mercy, as she called it, on Baggot Street, Dublin. The house had three purposes. It was to be a shelter for homeless women and for domestic servant women who were working in households where they were exposed to sexual harassment, if not sexual abuse. That was one purpose of the house. The second was to provide a school for poor girls. At that point, in the late 1820s and early 1830s, there was no provision for education of poor girls. If your family were wealthy, they could send you to a boarding school. But if you were poor, there was no way you could be educated. And the third purpose was the visitation of the sick and dying poor living in hovels in and around Dublin. That's sort of the nugget. Catherine realized early on, and so did her volunteer associates at Baggot Street, that they would need to found a religious order if they wanted to have these works of mercy continue beyond their own lives. And so in 1831, after making a novitiate with the Presentation Sisters, Catherine and two colleagues professed their vows as the first Sisters of Mercy. On your outline, I've tried to list a couple of things that I think might make Catherine appealing to the faculty and staff of your schools as well as to your students. She wasn't a nun all her life. She wasn't born in a religious habit. She was a good-looking woman who had proposals of marriage. And so for at least 52 years of her life, she was a laywoman. During that time, she also became the adoptive mother of 9 children, including 3 boys. 5 of them were the children of her now deceased sister and brother-in-law. 2 of them were orphans, basically that she had found on the streets. And 2 of them were cousins whose parents died. What touches me mostly is, the great humanity of Catherine Macaulay. I mean, she was a woman who felt fatigue. You have portraits of her in your schools, I imagine, and she looks very sedate and calm in those portraits. But that's not the whole picture. I mean, she got tired like the rest of us. She felt certain repugnances. There were certain convent practices that I won't go into that she found repugnant, to use the word she used. She felt that she was impatient with a lot of things. In fact, she wrote a prayer for patience that she begged God to help her be patient. And she felt the need for human support, the way all of us do. That's what's so wonderful about the MESA organization. You will now have the support of one another and the collaboration of one another, and that will be beneficial to each of you. I'm going to discipline myself to stop from time to time and ask you questions, or ask you what you want to comment on, or what reaction you have. So now might be a good moment to begin that. Any comment, any reaction, any question that any of you would like to make at this point? Don't be afraid of the first one. Yes.
Okay. This is Cheryl Krieger from Farmington Hills, Mercy. And no, you can't see me. Is that?
Could you speak a smidge louder so I could hear you?
Can you hear me now?
Better, yes.
Okay. I have a question. I have a comment, a question. My comment is, I really appreciated you saying that she might get tired from time to time. I don't know why that never occurred to me. I guess I held Catherine up on such a high pedestal, and for her, although she's humble, just, I mean, how wonderful she was. But my question is this. When you, of course, you piqued my interest when you said she found certain practices repugnant. Are you talking about the church or society or whatever?
No, I was talking about practices of convent life, religious life. One of her hesitances before founding the Sisters of Mercy was she knew of certain things, you know, like kneeling to a superior. She never thought anybody ought to kneel to the religious superior of a community. But if I could go back to the matter of her fatigue, there is one short paragraph in one of her letters that I particularly love. And it's a letter she wrote in October 1840. And she had just come back from a long stagecoach and rail train and canal trip to the west of Ireland. And she had to rush back to get two sisters on a boat to England. And you're not praying hard enough for this cough. Catherine had come back, and the next day she wrote a letter. And she said, "Thank God I am at rest again. And now I think the name of another foundation would make me sick. But they say I would get up again." That old task of each of us. Sure, we're going to get sick and we're going to get tired, but always the call to get up again. But Catherine was more than willing to acknowledge that even to think about creating another foundation of Sisters of Mercy at that particular point would make her sick. Any other comments at this point? All right, well, save up your comments and reactions because I'm eager for them.
Sorry, can I come in? Hi, I'm Silvia from Sant'Efia in Argentina. and it's a brief comment. This question, this topic you mentioned that she was in some way a mother of 9 children before becoming a Sister of Mercy, and that this included boys. For us, for those of us who work in co-ed schools, you know, it's good to hear that, okay, that she was a mother of both girls and boys, especially, of course, after the emphasis of the education of women that came later on. But, you know, it's good to know that she had also been a mother of little boys too. Thank you.
Yes, and she would highly approve of the co-ed schools we now have. It was just in her day, the Christian Brothers had schools for poor boys. And the general tenor of the world at that time was, if you're going to educate a child, educate the boys, you know. But early on, Sisters of Mercy started educating boys. And certainly Catherine McCauley would support it today. So I'm delighted that you have co-ed schools.
Thank you.
A number of attitudes of Catherine McCauley, I think, are helpful. For example, she took one day at a time. Sometimes we're tempted to live next week, today, you know, and we're tempted to want to achieve the virtue or the success or the effectiveness that maybe we'll achieve in a month. We want to achieve it today. Catherine McCauley had a very interesting statement about that. She said, "The simplest and most practical lesson I know is to resolve to be good today, but better tomorrow. Let us take one day only in hands at a time, merely making a resolve for tomorrow. Thus, we may hope to get on, taking short, careful steps, not great strides." I'm reading from a book that I pulled together a few years ago called The Practical Sayings of Catherine McCauley. It's a reprint of a book that one of her early associates at Bagot Street pulled together in the 1860s. And I regard it as that 1860s book as one of the most authentic recordings of Catherine's sayings. And then in an appendix, I've added a few more sayings from her letters. I had the hope over the last couple of weeks that each of you had a copy of this book. It doesn't cost an arm and a leg, and I'll chat about it with the folks in Silver Spring, because it could be very helpful to you. Catherine was also a woman who learned from her mistakes. I mean, none of us is going to go through life or go through our profession or our daily work without mistakes. If we think we are, we need a dose of reality. But she also said that she was never too old to learn. And that notion of continuing learning is crucial for us as teachers and school administrators. Catherine was also very loving and nurturing, not just of the young. Sometimes we get the false notion that somehow it's going to be better if we're stiff. I don't think stiffness is educative of anybody, and Catherine certainly didn't. She was very loving. If you read her letters, nearly every single one of them ends with the affectionate love of your M.C. Macaulay. Didn't call herself Reverend Mother. She called herself M.C. Mary Catherine Macaulay. Catherine also was encouraging to both men and women. We have male associates here in Rochester, many of whom say to me, "Oh, Mary, I couldn't get up without Catherine Macaulay in the morning." And I think what they mean is they find her helpful in their lives. They lean on her support and assistance. They are inspired by her, and they feel encouraged by her. It certainly would be everybody's hope that everybody working in Mercy Education or any Mercy ministry would feel encouraged in that endeavor by Catherine Macaulay. I don't know if you have any questions, thoughts, comments there. I brought my trusty clock so I, don't spend all the time on page 1 of the outline and not move on. So let me move on briefly. One of the things Catherine frequently said was that we should be aware that, yes, we do have faults, and we're going to have them till our death. Again, one of her sayings was this: "Let us not feel distressed that others know our faults. We all have our imperfections and shall have them till our death," in case we thought otherwise. God has never bestowed all his blessings on one person. Sometimes we might be tempted to think, that here I am and I'm the perfect one. God has bestowed all his blessings on me. He says God never bestowed all his blessings on one person. He did not give to St. Peter what he gave to St. Paul, nor to either what he gave to St. John. Salutary thought for all of us, that we will have our faults. I don't know if you could name a sense of humor as a charism, but I'm strongly tempted to. I think a charism, a gift of God, a favor of God, a virtue given to a human being for the sake of others, I think such a charism certainly embraces the capacity to bring joy to a situation, to see the humorous side of a situation, to create moments of humor and playfulness and joy. Catherine had a very strong sense of humor. She used to write letters to novices, telling them that as soon as she got back to Bagot Street, she wanted to create a nonsensical club. And she would be the, president, and her niece would be the vice president, and somebody else could give lectures on nonsense. Now, I'll have to tell you frankly, I never got such a letter from any Reverend Mother in my experience, but good for Catherine. She used to write novices such letters. She was willing to take risks for the sake of the poor. When she founded communities in Carlow, Tullamore, Charleville, She went there sight unseen. Today, if we were founding a community, we'd send an advance party to check out the site, to find out what money was going to be available to the community there. That wasn't Catherine's mode. She went to these places without any assured income. So on the day that a chair of a board or a principal or a president of a school is worried about the funding for next year or funding for next month, I think it's important for you to know Catherine had those worries too, and yet she went forward. Sometimes we have to be persistent in our advocacy of the needs of the poor. I can imagine that sometimes a school has to be persistent in advocating that in its budget it set aside sufficient funds for financial aid. Because no matter what the population of a Mercy school, there must always be room in that school for those who cannot afford to pay the whole freight and who can only pay part of it or maybe none of it. Catherine was persistent in another way, and it's a long story that I won't tell you all the details of. But the local parish priest denied a regular chaplain to the school on Bagot Street and to the shelter for the women. And Catherine herself wanted a single priest to be the chaplain of the school so that there could be some consistency in the sacramental care of the girls. In that era, you received the sacrament of confirmation before First Holy Communion, so there were sacraments to be prepared for at the school on Bagot Street, and she wanted a single regular chaplain. Also, the women coming into the House of Mercy had their own stories, and she wanted a consistent priest to be the one who heard those stories and not a different person every day. That controversy lasted 2 years. And I only have admiration for Catherine McCauley that for as long as she could in that situation, she stuck by her conviction of the sacramental rights of the women and girls in the school and the shelter. We may have to do that sometimes. The last thing I want to say before I invite your comments is Catherine was a very humble person. For example, the sisters said there was nothing about her that walked around and said, "I am the foundress." I think you know what I mean. Certain people walk around in a certain way that sort of says, "I am the president," or "I am the commander-in-chief," or "I am the whatever." There was nothing about Catherine McCauley that did that. In fact, she never used of herself the word founder or foundress. Other people did. She never referred to herself as Reverend Mother. Other people did, but not she. There was a basic, humble, charitable attitude in her mind and heart. And that's a big reason why she's so attractive as a human being. So I've talked too much right now. How about the rest of you? Any comments or reactions or surprises or complaints? Anything you want to say? Remember, after today, you'll be one another's collaborators and supporters, so it's important that you share with one another.
Sister, this is Denise Marback. Could you talk about the path for Catherine to be canonized as a saint?
Could I talk about Catherine, what? To be declared a saint?
Yes.
Is that what you said?
The path where we are. Yes, exactly.
Well, that may happen and it may not happen. And in a way, there is one reason why it would be helpful, but there are a lot of reasons why it's not necessary. Catherine McCauley was a very human, holy woman. And as far as I'm concerned, and as far as the Sisters of Mercy of the world, 7,000 of us are concerned, she is with God, she is a saint, she is inspiring to all of us and helpful. So it's not really necessary for us that she be officially canonized by the Catholic Church. On the other hand, it could be helpful to people if the church lifted her up and pointed out the character of her life, that you all understand, the mercifulness of it, the charity of it, the devotion to the care of the poor of it. It could be beneficial to the members of the church if she were canonized. On the other hand, members of religious orders today are fully aware of how few married men and women who did not live together as brother and sister, but enjoyed the full sexual benefit and reality of marriage, how few of them have been canonized. And the members of the church may at the moment need more such men and women to be canonized before they need more members of religious orders canonized. That might be my personal view, but I certainly have also heard it expressed by other Sisters of Mercy. Nothing prevents us or any of our schools or other institutions from turning to Catherine McCauley in our need and asking for her help. And nothing prevents her from responding to that need and assisting us in all the hidden ways known only to God. I don't know if that helps, but that's one point of view on the canonization of Catherine McCauley. You sometimes hear it said, Catherine McCauley would not want to be canonized. I wouldn't put that opinion on Catherine McCauley. for one thing, she constantly deferred to the desires of God rather than her own desires. So I'm sure that in communion with God today in heaven, she defers to the desires of God and would not be telling God what to do. Any other comment or question? All right, I want to skip down to near the bottom of the first sheet of the outline where there's some conversation about charism. You, in the Mercy education system of the Americas, use the word charism very frequently in your message, in your mission statement, in your core values, and I'm sure that in each of your schools you've got documentation that refers to the Mercy charism. I just want to make a couple comments about that. Charism is a word that comes from the Greek. It was used by St. Paul in his writings to the early Christians. What it means is an enabling gift of God. If God calls me to be a nurse, for example, which hasn't happened, but if God were to call me to be a nurse in the manner of the gospel, with great compassion and tenderness toward the sick and dying, God does not call a human being to respond to the gospel in a certain way without at the same time giving the capacity to do that, giving the virtue needed for that, giving the gift that enables that. You all know when you meet a really good nurse, and that nurse has in her very spirit the human and the divine gifts of compassionate care of the sick and dying. So when we talk about the mercy charism, we're talking about what were those gifts that God gave Catherine McCauley that enabled her to do the work God asked of her, that enabled her to run that poor school, that enabled her to visit the sick and dying, that enabled her to shelter, hundreds of women by the time she died, and that enabled her to make 10 more foundations of the Sisters of Mercy in Ireland and England. Now, I'd be inclined to speak in the plural. I mean, I don't think I want to say we have one mercy charism. So I would talk about mercy charisms. And some that I would list, I think Catherine felt a great gratitude, and so do we all, for the mercy of God. The way I am treated mercifully by God. I think we see in Catherine her mercifulness and compassion toward all people. Her own sisters, the cholera victims she took care of for 7 months, the poor children at Bagot Street, poor barefoot girls in the school. I also think we see in Catherine a focus on the example of Jesus Christ. She learned what compassion was, what mercifulness was from the gospel and from the witness of Jesus' own life. And then I think somehow or other, God has given to her and gives to us a kind of can-do attitude, some practical attitude that when we come up against a need or we come up against a problem, by gum, we're going to try to find a solution. We're not just going to face the problem and say, oh, well, there's a problem, nothing can be done. We're going to try to find a solution. We're going to try to do something about it. We may not be successful, but we're going to try, with God's help, to solve that problem, to respond to that need, and to do so now, not a year from now. I don't know if any of that resonates with you, but when you see the word charism in your own document, it's really important that you understand that we're talking about the gifts of God that enable us to do the work God asks of us. If I could just read one paragraph in an essay called The Spirit of the Institute that Catherine composed, where she talks about this. She doesn't use the word charism, she uses the word grace. And she says, God never calls any person for any end without giving the means and necessary helps to carry them through all the difficulties of it. And it is not to be doubted, but that when God institutes a religious order, he gives at the same time the grace that is necessary for all those who are members or co-workers of that order. And then she goes on, we ought then have great confidence in God and the discharge of all these offices of mercy, spiritual and corporal. And that means that if you're engaged in running the school, a mercy school, it's really important that you have confidence that God, having called you to that work, will enable you to do it. That we have great confidence in God and the discharge of all these offices of mercy, which constitute the business of our lives, and assure ourselves that God will particularly concur with us to render them efficacious, as by his infinite mercy we daily experience. As much as you want a particular endeavor to succeed in your school, Catherine is basically saying God wants it even more if it is a merciful, compassionate endeavor. Take time for some comments, reactions, thoughts. Don't be afraid, you're not among strangers.
This is Pat in Farmington Hills. I think
Hello, Pat.
I appreciate, we frequently hear the message of the charism of Catherine McCauley and the outreach. I think what I take away from this, it's a new twist, is just on being a teacher, an administrator, from that aspect, and looking at how the charism can be implemented just even within our teams, not just in instilling in our students for outreach, but also from an administrative strategy. I think that's an important takeaway, at least for me.
Yes, I think you're dead right. I mean, a little later I was going to say something about the audiences of Mercy Education. They're not just the students, you know, it's one another, the faculty and staff, the parents, the alumni, the public. We can come to that a bit later. Any other comment? Let's kind of shift our focus a bit.
I had one comment.
Oh, sorry. Yes.
Sorry, I can you hear me? This is Tim Losher.
I can hear you, Tim.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
I guess it's a little bit of an awkward question, and this is a great place to ask it, though I'm a little apprehensive to do so.
Don't be apprehensive, please.
Well, I know somewhat that the relationship between Catherine and the church at the time was at times, I guess what you say, strained or difficult, or she was a real pioneer, and was sometimes her pioneering spirit was maybe a step or two ahead, perhaps, of others around her. I don't know how you certainly comment on that part of the statement, and I'm wondering how does that. I'm often wondering how our relationship with even our local diocese and so forth. If there's any advice you would give in sort of navigating that relationship when at times it feels as if that strain may also be there. I don't know how else to say that. I'd probably reword it if I tried to say it again, but
I think I got the gist of your question.
do you? Okay.
You know you're going to have a whole session on church relations and the schools toward the end of 2017-18.
Okay.
So I don't want to butt in on that. Yes, I've referred to one circumstance where Catherine had difficulty with a parish priest who did not have the merciful attitude toward the students in the school or the women in the house, in the shelter, that she had. There was also a parish priest who, when they first got started at Bagot Street, considered Catherine McCauley an upstart. You used the word pioneer. He considered her an upstart, and he said, that she could only do mischief by trying to assist the clergy. That's a direct quote. Well, I mean, maybe we need more mischief. But I don't want to give the impression that Catherine was not fully committed to collaborating with the church in all appropriate ways. And,
Right.
her relationship to Archbishop Murray, the Archbishop of Dublin, was a good and respectful one, and he had enormous respect for her. The difficulty with Daniel Murray, I think historians will say, he was not comfortable with conflict. He could have intervened in the situation about the chaplain, but he didn't. At least I've never found any evidence that he didn't. However, remember, historical evidence when you're standing in 2017 has to be written. Did he say something orally back in 1837? I don't know. Catherine had very good friends. Michael Blake, the Bishop of Dromore, which is a diocese north of Dublin, was a good personal friend of hers. When she died, he said she had been the second Bridget of Ireland. So, like all our relationships, some people understood her and supported her aims. Many more of them did so than the few who probably had certain sexist attitudes. They weren't about to submit to what a woman asked of them. I trust that when you have the session on church relations later in the year, you will get very, very good insights. I think by and large, the Sisters of Mercy have been very astute about such matters.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, Tim?
That's wonderful. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, well, let's talk about some aspects of her attitudes toward education. As is clear to you, I'm sure, Catherine's primary aim in education was to provide it to those who had previously been denied education. And that involved the poor, and that involved poor barefoot girls. I'll just tell you one short story. When they opened a branch house of the Dublin community in Kingston, which is present-day Dunleary on the Irish Sea, they opened a convent there as a kind of temporary convalescent house because so many people in the community in Dublin had bad respiratory ailments due to the polluted air in Dublin. However, when Catherine went to Kingston, she immediately saw neglected girls loitering on the streets, and she knew they had no school. So she went to the parish priest. She made clear to him she had no money to contribute to the process, but she said she would donate the coach house on their property there because they had no coach and they didn't need a coach house, and she would donate the stable on the property because they had no horses and didn't need a stable, and she said she would give whatever they made on the next fundraising bazaar, which turned out to be 50 British pounds. She gave that to the parish priest. He went ahead and renovated the coach house and stable into a school. And then Catherine got the bill for the whole construction, 275 pounds that she owed the builder. She tried unsuccessfully to convince the builder that it was not a bill she had indented, but that the parish priest should be paying for that. That didn't work. The builder brought a lawsuit against her in the Dublin courts. The courts decided in favor of the builder, and she was told to pay 375 pounds for the construction of the school. She had no such money, so she didn't pay it. And in the fall of 1838, an eviction notice was put on the convent, and they had to suddenly leave the convent in Kingston and go back to Dublin, and the school was closed. the humiliation of the lawsuit and the eviction were, yes, to some extent painful. But what really pained Catherine McCauley was the neglect now of the girls loitering on the roads of Kingston. And she said, God knows I would rather be cold and hungry than the poor of Kingston should be deprived of any consolation in our power to afford. That was basically her attitude about providing education to those who need it, whether or not they could pay for it. And I know this will always be a very important aspect of Mercy education. I know it's an annual concern in budgeting for the schools, and I can only hope and pray that each school finds it within its spirit to provide education to those capable of the level of education offered in the school and desirous to benefit by it. I just would make one more point in that early comment. A basic educational principle with Catherine McCauley is that people learn more by example than by precept. That is, if I'm teaching and I'm trying to teach something about mercifulness, and yet I, as a person, am harsh toward students, cold toward them, gloomy toward them, unsympathetic of their legitimate problems, needs, whatever. I'm teaching more by my behavior than by whatever words I say in the front of the classroom. That's a hard part of teaching. I can't very well teach that it's very important to read and to have a love for lifelong learning, and then be evidently myself never given to reading and never engaging in lifelong learning. The whole principle of the importance of doing what we would instruct others to do, I think, is a fundamental mercy principle. If I could comment on her attitudes toward administration, and then we'll take a break. I think an important role of administration in any mercy institution is the development of leaders, not just one or two people to take over administrative jobs, but the development of the leadership capacity of the students and of one another. To do that, I think we need to assist people by motivating them, inspiring them, encouraging them. And one other thing that's helpful is the avoidance of making too many laws. Catherine had a saying that probably should be on the wall of every Mercy educational institution. She said, "Be careful not to make too many laws, for if you draw the string too tight, it will break." That is, give people room to develop, to use their own methods, to resolve issues at their level. Don't tie the whole organization up with too many strings that don't allow people to exercise their own judgment, their own initiative, their own solutions to problems. Be careful not to make too many laws, for if you draw the string too tight, it will break. Good piece of information to put on the refrigerator door. I think Catherine would certainly say today that a Mercy school should function in collaboration with other institutions and with the civic community. If the civic community is conducting what we here in Rochester call a clean sweep, picking up all the litter on the nearby roads, and they ask for help from the school, I think it's helpful if the school will collaborate with the civic community to accomplish that task, which actually fits very closely with one of our critical concerns about care of the earth. But there are other ways, and that's not unrelated to my feeling that sometimes we might take too narrow a focus on who's the audience of Mercy Education. Of course, it's our students, but I also think it's their parents. I don't know, I may be estimating this inaccurately, but it's one thing in our schools to teach our students, help them see the legitimate needs of the world's refugees, the sufferings they are fleeing, the basic human needs that they're living without and seeking. It's another thing when they go home at night and perhaps encounter parents who think something the opposite of that. And we may have a role to play in the slow and courteous education of parents, as well as in the education of students. The same is true of our alumni. I don't know about the rest of you, but I think once you have taught somebody, you have established kind of a lifelong relationship. If 5 years later you're asked to write a letter of recommendation and you have a class book and can find it, and I think you should write the letter of recommendation. I think that schools have an obligation to their alumni for whatever ongoing development they can provide to the alumni. If we consider that alumni associations ought to have bowling parties and cocktail parties and golf tournaments, fine, all well and good. But I would hope that would not be the full extent of our alumni involvement, so that we do not leave our alumni and alumnae, 30 years later with a theology that was maybe appropriate in 1950 or 1970, but needs development in 2017. I mean, that's a big topic, and I don't know, maybe you want to comment on it. So like it or not, I guess, a school has, a mercy school by definition, has a wider audience than just its students. Any questions, critique, comment, complaints, anything you want to say to one another?
This is Cheryl Krieger again from Farmington Hills, and I just
Your name is Kate?
no, Cheryl.
Oh, Jill, sorry.
Cheryl, Cheryl.
Okay.
Okay, well, I agree with you, and I would just like to acknowledge the difficulty of carrying out that important mission. I've never seen of educating a broader audience than our students. The same contentious, shall I say, atmosphere that is in the general population, of course, with our diversity, is also in our schools. So, one in many times, anyway, it's just difficult to educate the broader masses. That's all I can say. I'd like to acknowledge that.
Oh, I would agree with you. And it takes great skill, you know, not pushiness, great, all of those talents that go into the educative process would be involved. Any other comment or? Sometimes,
Sister Mary?
you know, yes.
This is Kate from Mount
Hi,
St. Mary
Kate.
Academy. How are you? I feel so blessed to be here and to listen to all of the things that you've shared today. I think that all of us in education, at times, we do feel tired, and it's nice to have that validated and nice to say, well, even though we're tired, we're going to move on and do our best and do what's right for the children. So I just wanted to make sure that I had time to thank you because I've learned a lot today. And in a short period of time, I'm actually meeting with some parents. So if I leave early, it's because I'm working on that broader audience.
We'll remember you in our prayers when you leave.
Thank you.
Sometimes events occur. For example, I'm familiar with the secondary school where this year some young Muslim women have enrolled. And it provides an important opportunity for the students to come to understand Islam and Muslim community and to get over some of the very bad stereotypes and mischaracterizations that are out there. And sometimes, you know, you can just use that event as an occasion for explaining to parents the great benefit that's now come to the school and gently reminding them of the presence in our community of diverse and beloved people, you know. To go back to the fatigue factor, unfortunately, teaching, administering a school is not a 9-to-5 job. And fortunately, there's a bit of break in the summertime. When I was dean, I used to have trustees say to me, the faculty shouldn't be on a year-long contract. They don't even work in the summer. And I used to say, do you know what the faculty do in the summer? Do you know what's involved in preparing courses? Do you know what's involved in reading to bring courses up to date? Do you know, teaching? I doubt if there are many teachers who don't have to work a good part of the weekend on their teaching. Maybe I don't know all the teachers, but anyway, any other comment? All right, let's use the remaining 15 minutes we have to look at part 3 on that outline. And first of all, to acknowledge that today, the 21st century, 2017, is not 1831, and it's not 1841. It's a different world. Much of the world is the same as Catherine's world, but a great deal of it is different. And therefore, there are different obligations. The gospel is now in a different world. And we have to enable our students to develop a global international perspective. They've got to realize the world is bigger and they are implicated. That's why I thought it was important for us this morning to begin our gathering with prayer on behalf of all those countries gathered in Bonn, Germany, to work on the rule book for the Paris Climate Agreement. We are implicated in what they are doing. They are acting there on our behalf. We are on the earth that they are seeking to care for, and we have an obligation in relation to them. If today in Bonn, I understand that the Pacific Islanders, and especially people from Fiji, are leading the discussions. Those Pacific Islands are sinking into the Pacific Ocean because of the unprecedented rise in sea level. Fiji and Kiribati have already transported their people to new islands that are larger and higher above sea level. That doesn't happen to me in Rochester, New York, but those are my brothers and sisters over there on the Pacific Islands. And we need to enable our students to understand these things. They need to realize they're in a global earth community and they need to live accordingly. If a third of the food in a school dining room is thrown into waste and not composted, that's done in relation to children their age in Sudan, in Yemen, in Ethiopia, who are enduring famine because of droughts caused in large part by climate change. I think, especially in our country, but certainly around the world, we are experiencing what we thought was healed, racism. I mean, I don't think Catherine McCauley ever worried about racism. I mean, the Irish were the Irish. What she worried about was the poor ecumenical relations in Ireland. and the poor interfaith relations. But we have to worry about the poor racial relations and enable our students to grasp all that. I want to suggest a couple places that will be beneficial to faculty and staff in terms of global relationships. And one is the mercyworld.org website. Mercyworld, all one word, .org website. That is the international website of the Sisters of Mercy of the world. It comes out of Australia, but it's global in its content. And each week they publish an edition of Mercy e-News. And that's usually about 10 pages. And you can subscribe to it online, and then you automatically get it every week. And you get all kinds of wonderful ideas about what they're doing on Papua New Guinea, what's happening on Easter Island, what's happening in Kenya, what's happening in Newfoundland, perhaps even collaborations that you could have globally. It's a rich source of information. And also, you're familiar, I'm sure, with the U.S. website of the Sisters of Mercy that is open to anybody, and that's called Mercy Now, and you can register for that and get it every week. I was thinking the other day when we were talking about refugees here, what do our students across the United States, what do they know about Honduras? What do they know about Guatemala or El Salvador? What do they know about Puerto Rico? Are they among the high percentage of Americans who didn't realize that those who live in Puerto Rico are U.S. citizens? Are they among the unfortunately large number of Americans who, thought Puerto Rico was a foreign country, not a territory of the United States? The task before us today is much bigger than it was for Catherine Macaulay. And she would be the first to appreciate that. And we need to help one another in that regard. One of the great assets we have at the moment is Pope Francis, who's got a merciful heart, has a global sense, appreciates the fundamental human relationship called education. That is a benefit. Try to imagine the church or the Mercy education world at the moment if it were not in that supportive understanding. So I'd like to read, and then we'll spend the last few moments on responding to questions. You probably know that Catherine Macaulay composed the original rule of the Sisters of Mercy. She wrote it in the mid-1830s. She sent it off to Rome for approval. Rome considered it. Translated it into Italian, although at that time there was not a single Sister of Mercy in the world who could speak Italian. Rome translated it into Italian, printed it and published it in Italian, and sent it back to Bagot Street in Italian. So the woman who wrote it now needed help to read it. and she got help from priests. In that rule, she has a paragraph in the chapter on the schools that I've given to you at the bottom of the outline, and I would like to read it. You'll notice that I put in brackets and men or men. I think Catherine McCauley would approve of my doing that. She didn't have those words then, but I think she would have them now. She said, no work of charity can be more productive of good to society. That's quite a claim. No work of charity can be more productive of good to society or more conducive to the happiness of the poor than the careful instruction of women and men. Since whatever be the station they are destined to fill, whatever the young man or the young woman is going to go on and do in life, become a chemical engineer, become a painter, become a business executive. Whatever be the station they are destined to fill, their example will always possess influence. And wherever a religious woman, and she doesn't mean a nun, she doesn't mean a member of a religious order, she means any woman educated to a mature understanding of her faith. Wherever a religious woman or man presides, peace and good order are generally to be found. I think that's a great claim about Mercy Education and about the work of all of you. That nothing you could be doing, no work of charity you could be engaged in, could be, would be, can be more productive of good to society or more conducive to the happiness of the poor than the careful education you're providing. That's something to think about at night when you put your head on the pillow and you're dog tired, that at least that day you've engaged in a work that has been productive of good to society and conducive to the happiness of the poor in one way or another, in ways you can see, in ways you perhaps cannot see. So, some final thoughts, questions, whatever. I think we got 3 or 4 minutes.
Thank you, sister. This is Nicole Jesse, and I
Hello,
just
Nicole.
I kind of have a slightly different perspective. I know many of the people that are on this conference call are educators, people that are actually in the schools and maybe school administrators. I have a slightly different role. I am currently on the board of Mercy High School in Omaha, and
You're
so I
chair
kind
of
of
the
look.
board, aren't you?
Yes, I am chair of the board. Yes, and you know it's. You brought up so many wonderful things. I learned several new things about Catherine that I didn't know, and Mercy's been a part of my life for a very long time, so thank you for that. But the other thing that I guess I wanted to mention back when we were talking about the audience for Mercy, the comment that I would make, or maybe the encouragement that I would provide to everybody that is on this, sometimes we just need to provide an invitation. You know, we can't force people to do a lot of things. That usually doesn't work. It's never very successful. But if we sometimes just make sure that we are inviting people to know and to learn about Mercy, what it is, what it provides, how it influences people and affects their lives, I think that in and of itself can do so much to just help with growing Catherine's work and spreading the mission, because it's very, very important. And so I would just encourage people to know that, make that invitation, be open to inviting people in and saying, this is what we offer, or this is what we need from you, because it's not a one-way street. We can provide, but we also need to be open to receiving as well.
You're absolutely right, Nicole. I mean, those are very important comments that you made. Sometimes we just don't attach enough words to something. I'm thinking of when Catherine would conduct a fundraising bazaar to support Bagot Street. Always, she put an ad in a local newspaper, and she explained the benefit of contributing to that bazaar in terms of merciful contributions to women and girls. And then after the bazaar, she always put a thank you notice in the daily paper of the Dublin. And I'm thinking of one where she said, if God has promised a reward to those who give a cup of cold water, what will God not do for you who contributed so generously to, I mean, just a few words that included them in the mission, and, thank them. I mean, gratitude's a fundamental mercy virtue, if I can put it that way. And we can never thank people enough for all their support. But, board education is also got to be done with some care. Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yeah. Thanks for that contribution. Anybody else? Well, I very much enjoyed my time with you. I consider it a privilege, and who knows, maybe we'll find a way to do it another time. I have a feeling maybe I should sign off because it's after 12:30, isn't it?
Sister Mary, did you want to just end with the sushi pay?
Oh, yes. Thanks for the reminder. You have in one of the handouts you got a copy of the sushi pay. I assume that in your schools, from time to time, you sing one of the musical versions of the sushi pay. I mean, there is a version in Filipino, there's a version in the Guam dialect, there's a Spanish version, there are several English versions. This is a prayer which many musicians have set to music. The prayer originally was written in ordinary prose words by Catherine Macaulay, and that's what I've given you. I just want to draw your attention to two ideas, and then we'll pray it together. Catherine is putting herself in the arms of the providence of God with lively, unlimited confidence in God. I hope that each of you will have lively, unlimited confidence in God's companionship in your work. And the other point is in the second paragraph. She asked God to take from her heart all painful anxiety. God knows there are many reasons why people who administer a school today would have reasons for painful anxiety. But I ask God, and I know you will ask God, to not let that anxiety be debilitating to you in any way. So with you, let us now pray together the words of her Sushipe, and with that we'll sign off. My God, I am thine for all eternity. Teach me to cast my whole self into the arms of thy providence with the most lively, unlimited confidence in thy compassionate, tender pity. Grant, O most merciful Redeemer, that whatever thou dost ordain or permit may always be acceptable to me. Take from my heart all painful anxiety. Suffer nothing to afflict me but sin, nothing to delight me but the hope of coming to the possession of thee, my God, in thy own everlasting kingdom. Amen.
Amen.